Hi, this is a rehearsal presentation for a sort of government-flavored edition of my Donkey Talk. Well, hey, thanks for having me here. I'm going to go over a presentation which is actually sort of the second pull of a standard talk that I have called the Coming Donkey Apocalypse. Now, if you remember the George Romero series of movies, it was sort of like Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Donkey, I think, came afterwards. And that's kind of what we have here is as the phenomena, if you will, spreads out into the mainstream, into the world. What does it look like when DevOps goes more and more mainstream? Which is the point of this talk. Now, this talk is really angled towards a general audience, but I've tried to add in the sort of clarifications about what it means for government and how folks like yourself kind of fit into here and what your concerns are. But in general, it's sort of strikingly similar when I look across the sort of private and public sector, the concerns and opportunities and advantages and whatnot that people can have. So I like to begin my talk with conclusions. I'll get to introducing myself next in case you're wondering who I am exactly and why I have some authority to speak on this. But I like to go over conclusions so that, if you want to get home early or need to use the restroom or whatever, you can feel free to do that, and I've gotten my points across. So first of all, we're in this cycle of IT and really in the business world and just the normal organization world where organizations are craving faster, more agile IT that creates better product. Not only higher quality product in the sense of QA, if you will, but also better designed and more responsive and just product that all along is more useful, right? They want their software to be much better. And there's really this craving in a way that I haven't seen in a long time, back since my online banking days in the late 90s. Now, in the private sector, the motivations for doing this are pretty clear. It's to outcompete people and retain customers that you have. Come up with new mousetraps that people want to buy, if you will. In the government sector, I think there's a similar desire that as I talk with government people they have, and there really is this urge to deliver better software that works more effectively, that is delivered at a faster clip that allows people to address these concerns of quality and speed, right? So you want to be more responsive to needs as they emerge, get applications out the door faster. You don't want to say something takes a long time to do, right? Because it's sort of demonstrated in the consumer space that you can do things much, you can get new software out the door quickly, and there's this question of why can't you do it, and it's sort of core to the service that you're providing that you'll be updating things and changing them around. Now, interestingly, I think one of the more interesting things that government's faced with that we don't have in the private sector is, in the private sector, you can go out of business, essentially, and you can just end your worries, more or less. But in government, IT has to, stay there, right? As long as the service is delivered, IT has to stay there delivering that service, and it needs to evolve. So you can't really escape legacy as quickly as you can. And therefore, I think there's concerns. There's a part of portfolio management we'll get to. Managing that legacy is a lot more important than it is in the private sector because you don't want to get pulled down by the quick side of legacy IT. So in this environment of wanting to do things better and faster and improve the what I like to call design quality of your software product, DevOps really comes in as kind of like the hero that's going to save the day, and it stands astride of cloud and agile software development, a lot of things underneath it. But at the moment, it really is, I think, representative of people's hopes and dreams for helping companies become better at delivering their software, and it really is going mainstream. We're seeing that phenomena quite a bit. But in order for DevOps to be successful, there's a lot of what I would call meatware problems, and that is process and culture, people problems, right? The meat, not necessarily hardware or software problems that need to be fixed, or there's going to be quite a bit of carnage and failure as people are predicting, as we'll get into. So it's important to look at these meatware issues. And this really comes to light when you look at the current state of mainstream IT. And it's pretty much qualitatively and quantitatively, just anecdotally and in surveys and things like that, a pretty good fact, if you will, that mainstream IT isn't really meeting the needs of the organizations they're supporting. We'll see some evidence that supports the fact or the statement that IT could be doing a lot better, and they're actually declining in their usefulness to businesses, right? And businesses and organizations want to move a lot faster. But IT isn't really up to snuff, if you will. So there's improvement that they need to do. There's a burning platform. Now, as I was mentioning, when it comes to helping the mainstream or the donkeys, if you're one of those quick students and you're thinking ahead, reading ahead of the slides, there's really four issues that I talk about pretty frequently. And let's see, lowercase numbers. You see how those are uppercase? Not good. In conclusion. So the first is that while technology is not really a problem, you need to make sure you have the right technology in place. So I want to go over I'll simplify this notion of cloud native and cloud platforms, and we'll see how that stack enables a lot of this DevOps thing, and how it lays the groundwork for worrying about these other issues and becoming more of an agile organization. It gets you continuous delivery in DevOps. Now, once you get that groundwork laid there, the role of management changes quite a bit. And most people talk about the day-to-day of what developers and operators and teams and those kind of individual contributors need to do. But I want to argue that management has a lot that it needs to do, and in many ways it needs to change to support this process. They become more critical than ever in the flow of things. So they also have homework to do. A lot of the people here, management type folks. And one of those things that I think is vital is really getting a very close hold over portfolio management and looking at doing portfolio management kind of like forestry, right? Like maintaining the forest and making sure that you plan out the forest, your applications, your portfolio, so that they don't end up taking over, and that you're given what people would consider legacy, your existing applications don't become that quicksand I was talking about earlier. You do portfolio management to make room for innovation and to make room for doing things in a new way and improving. And so I think there's a renewed focus we're going to have and need to have on portfolio management. And finally, what I'll get into is that the organization structure has to change quite a bit to adapt to this. Now, you've probably all heard of this notion of Conway's Law. I guess it's not a notion, a law. And that is very much the case in this cloud and DevOps and continuous delivery world, where when you use these new technologies to achieve these new benefits of better quality, better designed software being delivered on faster turns, your organization has to change appropriately, or the organization structure is going to sort of warp what your capabilities and your applications are. So that has to change around as well, as we'll get into. So just briefly, hello, this is me. I work at Pivotal as essentially doing this, talking with people and helping explain to them kind of how I see us at Pivotal improving the software development world, helping make products better essentially. So I work in marketing, and some people would call what I and my team does evangelism, which is certainly the case. But with the background I have, you can see that it's kind of just a continuation of the study that I've been doing in the industry analyst and the strategy and the development world. And so for about 8 years or so, I was an analyst at 2 different firms, most recently at 451 Research, where I headed up 2 practices, one on infrastructure software and the other one on basically software development and DevOps and things like that, where we really worked on the DevOps practice and studied it quite a bit. And a lot of the stuff we did here, we studied there at 451. I also worked at RedMonk for a good 6 years or so. That was a smaller firm, but we were focused a lot on emerging technologies and open source software and how new technologies are used basically to improve IT. And those guys are still around. They do both bodies do a lot of wonderful work if you're interested in checking out more. Now, I live down in Austin, so I did my compulsory 2-year tour at Dell. There I worked in corporate strategy and M&A, helping start up and plan the software group and working on acquisitions and things like that, and also working on cloud strategy company-wide, which is a real exciting thing for me to do. It was fascinating, actually. And if you're interested in checking out more of what I do, in addition to going to the Pivotal blogs and looking what I do there, I do a lot of podcasts. I do a weekly one just kind of covering the infrastructure software world called Software Defined Talk. You can find there. And I write a column on DevOps almost pretty much monthly over at Fierce DevOps. And you can also go to my website and email me or follow me on Twitter. I'm very generally interested in talking with people about what they're doing in IT and just passing the time with them doing that. It's really my hobby, studying IT, as you can guess from my background. So I'd love to discuss things, afterwards or whenever, if you're equally interested in that. So let's start off with defining what's going on and kind of like relative to DevOps in the macro world, the big picture, if you will. And what we're seeing is this in not only the business world, but I think all sectors, is this kind of fear of nerds, right? Like the nerds, if you will, the computer nerds have this interesting amount of control because the primacy of computers, I'm purposely using kind of like corny, big elephant words here, but the importance of IT has increased more and more. So nerds are really becoming something to be feared or used to the advantage of organizations. And you can see that this is the most recent quote that I have from the annual shareholder letter for J.P. Morgan Chase for JPMC that Jamie Dimon sent out. And it's kind of echoed in this, and you see this sentiment echoed in lots of enlightened places in the business world, where this idea of Silicon Valley, right? The computer people are coming after us. They're trying to disrupt our businesses with the way they're doing computers, the way they're doing their custom developed software. And what's different about how it's been in the past is the business leaders, the leaders of the organizations who are not the nerds, they really do see IT as something they could be using, and they want to take advantage of IT and custom written software as much as those disruptors do, right? And that's directly in this quote here, right? And this is kind of the core of what we encounter and what I encounter in the Pivotal world, is companies who want to start using IT to be really a core enabler of their business and help run it in a different, better way. Now, how is that doing, right? So as an example, if you want to be one of these sort of Ubers of the world, right? Like what could be more boring than taxis and car services, and yet it's one of the more exciting, as a user of it, interesting things out there, right? Uber is really using software as a core part of how it runs its business to totally change, from my vantage point, a user, what that business looks like, and has phenomenal growth. And you see the same phenomenon with Airbnb and all sorts of things like that. So we experience IT being a key part of how businesses are executed in many different places in our life, right? And we want to know how we can adopt that in our organization and our businesses. And as you can see in the highlighted part here, we're not doing very well, right? Like, so this is from a recent Cutter Consortium survey. And what I really like about this one question is that it tracks 3 years, right? So you kind of learn this in strategy. One data point is not really sufficient, but if you have 2, 3 more data points year over year, that's great. Because what this shows, when they're asking questions, what's the IT organization's role in business innovation, helping your organization, it shows not only that it's 31%, right? So let's say 30%, a third, but that it's been steeply declining over the years. So at some point, IT was actually kind of a big deal. They were helpful. And this is probably like towards the apex of virtualization, right? Virtualization was this great effect where you just installed it and you got cost savings, you got more agility and dynamic disaster recovery. You got all these new capabilities just by installing virtualization. And so we had this era where IT was just like in a very easy way. It wasn't necessarily cheap as our VMware buddies can attest to, but it was effective. It was worth it. But as virtualization has kind of saturated the market and we've gotten our benefits from that, IT has fallen from its primacy. It needs some new way of being valuable to the business. And you see some other survey results there on the left side, right? So only a quarter of organizations feel like they're innovating in agile ways, right? And in the federal space, from one survey here, you can see that 87% of them feel like they can't deploy new systems fast enough, right? So there's this hunger to move faster and for IT to do more, but pretty much across the board, you can see that it's not happening. Now, here we are. DevOps. The DevOps will of course save us, right? That's why I'm here trying to, kind of explaining and going over what DevOps is and giving some tips of how to help out and a lot of the focus that you guys have in addition to other priorities. Now, it is true that if you manage to get a fire-breathing unicorn mounted by a cat with a golden gun, I mean, I'm pretty sure that outfit will save anything for you, right? The question is, how do I achieve that, right? So you can't just install some funny piece of clip art or some technology and get DevOps to save you. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a very powerful, just like this image looks powerful tool, but it takes some discipline and to get it right. And we see that reflected in some of the predictions, like from Gartner, right? So you can get your A team in place here, right? And the A team's always, with their corrugated metal and their gyrocopters, they're always saving people and things are working out well, but they're called the A team because it's a very select few people, right, who can kind of just intuitively understand this. And it's not that you need to proceed with caution to avoid being this 90% of organizations who will fail at it, but you need to understand and educate yourself about it. You need to not be naive about how different it is and what it requires to be successful at DevOps. So that's sort of like the word of caution, right? DevOps is very powerful, as is cloud and things like that. But you need to understand what they are and how to apply them, and most importantly, how to change your organization and culture to take advantage of them instead of being in kind of like the Ian Head's Deadpool here of people who failed at it. So let's talk about who are we saving here, right? Like we're not worried about good old Colonel Hannibal there and Mr. T and all those other people. Madman Murdoch. We're worried about what I like to call donkeys. And of course, what I mean by donkeys are mainstream normal people, right? And I mean that in a very affectionate way, as you'll see here, right? So whenever you look at people talking about DevOps and you kind of listen in on it or read about it in cloud, it's really important to understand the different audiences and the different people out there and groups of people who will be using this IT. Now, pretty much this is getting much better over the past year and a half, maybe 2 years. But for a long time, all of the talk about IT, and still a lot to this day, is about these unicorns over here. And, they seem to have unlimited resources. They're not held back by the past. They get all the attention. They can do so much, and they're doing these wondrous things. And they really are the stuff of legend, right? Now, we could go on and on about how they're much different than the other categories, right? They often have maybe 5 applications they have to support. They don't need to worry about all sorts of regulation and compliance and things like that. They can invent what their business is. And there's many of dead unicorns out there who were kind of stillborn and never escaped, right? We only focus on the ones that are successful. There's a halo effect there. But these folks pretty much take care of themselves. They have the awesome fire-breathing unicorns and golden cat-wielding guns and everything. Now, next over is another class, sort of like the war horse, right? They're very well fed. They've got lots of resources. They're huge companies ridden by kings, right? They're not quite fire-breathing unicorns, but they lead a pretty good life. And whenever the king leading them, the people leading them, decides they want to do something, they have tremendous amounts of resources to put behind it, and they generally do okay. Now, this is a lot of Pivotal customers fit into this category, right? The sort of Global 2000. And they're actually quite fun to work with because they're very very skilled and have lots of resources. But you can still also lose track of what's actually going on in the mainstream world because most people fall in this last category, and that is the donkeys, right? And donkeys they're very hardworking people, or very hardworking beasts of burden, right? They tend to get little respect because they're not flashy or breathing fire or anything like that. But they really want to do well, right? They really aspire to strap a carrot onto their head and act like a unicorn, right? They want to have all the attributes of the warhorse and the unicorn, and they just want to know how. They want to know how to do that. It's not that they're lazy or they have low ambitions. It's just that they need some assistance getting there, right? And so this is what I try to study is over the course of my career, I try to study how to help the donkeys out because I feel like I've always been in this category of someone who needs help understanding something, but once I understand it and I'm given the tools to do it, I do pretty well, right? So let's look at the donkeys a little bit, right? So the donkeys are usually kind of like this piece of clip art, right? They're usually pretty well dressed. They're doing all right for themselves, but their technology and their culture is like this piece of clip art. It's pretty dated, it's weird. And sometimes they're even pretty sassy and not really self-aware. They're not really sure that they actually are donkeys, albeit well-dressed one, right? And you see this in IT departments. It's kind of like the IT department of slow or even worse, no. It just takes them a year to get a feature out the door that these, a war horse or a unicorn wouldn't take so long. Any change takes forever. And as a consequence, the business kind of struggles to figure out how to use them. The organization doesn't really want to rely on IT because it's always a hassle to go talk to these braying donkeys who are complaining about it. It's not really being working very well. And as a consequence, IT gets looked at as a burden, as a cost center, right? And usually this is not really due to the donkeys' necessarily attitude. It's just kind of the hand they've been dealt, and they haven't really been given sufficient resources like the other equestrian metaphors to make things better. So they need to be more scrappy and figure out how to persevere past this. And what I've been observing recently, this is not always the case, but at the moment we're in this cycle where the problem, what's holding the donkeys back is not really technology. There are great technologies out there, better than when I used to be a programmer, and some of the best technologies we've seen in a long time to really take care of issues and improve the way you do your software delivery. But it's really what I would call the meatware problems, the culture and the thinking, the people problems, right, that are holding donkeys back. If they could just get this right technology in place and then also change the way they think about and use it, they can actually upgrade their equestrian metaphor and really, or at the very least, strap that carrot on their head and kind of masquerade as a unicorn, which would be wonderful. And you see this reflected in surveys, right, where what's holding people back from taking advantage of digital trends? This is a relatively large study, which by some reputable folks, and I think it's representative of what I would see as an analyst and see in various surveys, right? So look at these things that are holding people back and kind of cross it with, I also pulled in what some government concerns are for becoming more digital from some other surveys. But these are really people concerns, right? These are not really technology concerns so much. Like security arguably is always a people concern, but there's a lot of technology in there, right? But there's a fair amount of technology kind of sprinkled about there, but most of the things holding people back are meatware issues, right? Especially this sort of fear of change and inflexible practices and lack of collaboration. These are the issues that need to be solved once you get the right technology in place. And what I want to talk about by way of urinals is what happens when you don't put the right culture in place. When you put the right technology in place, but your culture is wrong, you end up really just wasting more time. Now, it looks like, for those people who are not men in here, this is a quick little tour of the men's room. It's sort of one of the last places where everyone is not aware of. These are urinals, right? And these are actually some pretty fantastic urinals. These are kind of vintage ones. I mean, we'll see why they're not fantastic, but they're the only ones better. There's these ones that are floor to ceiling, and those are pretty great. You can see those at Costco's usually, or old movie theaters. But what was going on here, if you look on top, there's these very modern sensors. And for the purpose of this parable, let's just say that these were here to save water, right? So we had this idea of like, we need to save water. These gigantic bowls of urinals that you could kind of take a bath in if you were small enough. Like there's just sucking up so much water. So let's make it so people can't flush them as much by putting sensors on here. And so they slapped all these sensors on here, and that's great. But they left these old, they weren't thinking well enough. They didn't change how they're operating enough, and they left these old things here, so it's a huge amount of water still being used. And you can also just press this button to flush it. A lot of people are clever with that way. So this kind of gets you halfway. It starts to save water, but it doesn't focus on the big picture of the problem, right? Like really you need to rip out, as quaint and awesome as these journals are, you've got to rip them out to solve the whole problem. And that's really an example of bad meatware thinking ruining a technology, right? So the effect of this is not as maximized as it could be. So what does that have to do with DevOps and cloud? Well, I like to use this pie chart. I always call it Bittman's sad pie. And it's an example of that same bad urinal effect happening in the cloud space, right? So he asked a conference crowd, what's wrong with your private cloud? What's going wrong? And only 5% said that everything was great. But if you look at this, everyone else had some problem. And again, there's one, where's the technology? Using the wrong technology was a very small part of it. The other ones were all meatware issues, right? So they'd got the technology in place, but there was something wrong with it still. And most of those were meatware. And you can kind of look up some other interesting data points there. But this sort of proves the point in a pie chart-y kind of way that it's not only the technology that you need to focus on, but the meatware as well. And to that end, let's look at DevOps as kind of the current state of the art of meatware. It's like the best bucket of meatware that we have going for us at the moment. And let's understand where it comes from and what it is so that we can start understanding how to apply it to your organization when you have the right technology in place. So DevOps kind of started off probably in the mid-2000s or so. Back then it didn't really have a name. It was just what large webscale.com companies were doing to run their software over the internet, right? They were focused on uptime. Like they didn't want their software to go down because in the consumer space, once your software is down, people move to other things, right? Like you remember when Twitter was going down all the time. I remember something in the federal government, there was some issue with the big public site having terrible uptime, and it caused all sorts of problems. But basically it starts off with just wanting to keep your software up. And what you realize working at internet scale or web scale is that the first part of keeping your software up is getting your developers to write the software correctly. And this was like a big revelation. So operations people have to go back to development and educate them and get them to write their software in the right way. They have to say, here's the way you need to write the software for me to support the uptime. Now, in the meantime, also in the consumer space, companies were looking at the ability to deliver functionality frequently into production as a competitive advantage. They wanted more and more features all the time. They were competing on doing more in that space. So they wanted a way to get code out the door quickly. Now, I didn't say get a release out the door. They wanted to get features out the door daily or weekly, right? Just small pieces of code, but something that had impact and value to the customer. And this really led to the third collection of things, leading to DevOps, is having a lean approach that focuses on removing as much waste time from the process so you can release more often, shortening the cycle that it takes to get code to production, right? Really focusing on that customer value, stripping out everything from your process, mostly reviews and things like that, that really lengthens the time it takes to get your software out, and still needing a system that makes sure that your application stays up, that it's resilient, right? Now, a lot of what this resilience is basically the resilience versus failure is that you can release something into production. If you can roll it back almost immediately, maybe you don't actually need to have uptime. Maybe what you need to focus on is recovering from failure quickly. And so a lot of cloud technologies are supporting that, right? You don't necessarily fix the problem in production. You just have the ability to roll back changes and then deploy something again to fix it, if you will. So there's this idea of resilience versus uptime. Now, all of this kind of soup of concepts over the past 10 years has led to the idea of DevOps. That is, DevOps and operations as a function needs to be combined into the same team, because having them separate just doesn't cut it for satisfying all of these requirements. Now, a more formal definition from the Agile admin team down in Austin, some lovely folks who run the DevOps Days Austin down there, is up here on the screen, right? And I just want to emphasize two things. It really does literally mean development and operations people that function on the same team, right? It's you don't have a separate DevOps team. Like, that's a weird notion. That kind of, if you have a separate DevOps team, you're kind of not getting the point, right? You need that team with the developers, your operations people with the developers, not as a separate team. And also, operations people, by virtue of moving into the development team, or maybe you could think of it the other way, developers move into operations, whatever. I'm a developer, so I always think developer-centric. You start to take in some of the practices from software development into operations. Like, if you remember that rolling back and deploying little changes, right? And so that's a very real thing that starts to happen, which is an interesting phenomena to watch. And so to that end, my understanding is a lot of people here come from more of an operations background. So I wanted to give an overview of what I mean by taking on developer practices, by kind of pointing out what development cycles look like. And hopefully this isn't too pedantic, but as always, I think by making the implicit explicit, by making it visible, you can understand it a lot more. So this is a very simplified view. Don't worry, I'll show you a complicated view in case you think this is too simple. For those who like complicated things. But, basically requirements come from somewhere. Don't worry about that for now. They come in, you're going to, you need to implement something some way, right? And as a developer, you need to, let's say I have this application where I wanted to figure out, I'll skip doing an application. So, for the rehearsal crowd, requirements come in. The development team has to get together and design out how they're going to satisfy these requirements, right? So they need to do some amount of planning, and a lot of this planning, you have to do more and more planning as you get more and more code, but you try to design out your application well, so it's not just sitting down and typing immediately, right? And oftentimes, unless you're starting from scratch, you need to update your code, you bring in the existing code, and make sure that you've got the new changes that your teammates have done. You write your code, so you're writing your little feature in a web application. You build it, you verify that it worked, right? You run tests, all sorts of tests on it, and if everything worked, you check in this new part of functionality. Then that goes to everyone in your team, and you also have more verification at the team level that everything integrates together and it works and you haven't broken the build. And then you go back, right? Like, you just repeat the cycle over and over again. And so the point here is that there's a cycle. There's getting requirements, there's coding, there's integrating it and verifying it and repeating it over and over. This is the loop that developers participate in. And, as it says, there's also a lot of screwing around, right? Like enjoying some free beer, playing some ping pong, doing whatever it is those crazy developers do. But you have to keep in mind that a lot of that screwing around is really, like, developers are a weird breed, but it is because, like, there's like these blocks of time where they just stare at a screen coding, right? And so their brain has to rest a little bit. I don't know, that's my excuse as a former developer, but it is an interesting life being a developer, and it takes a certain mindset to be stuck in this loop, if you will. I mean, it's kind of a fascinating world. So, as promised, here's a more complicated view of it. This is actually a pretty old slide. I need to add a citation for, and from Eric Huddlestein, who was at the Duchess Group at the time. But it shows you a drawn-out version of this, right? Where coding is this very small part of it, and there's version control that people check into. And if you've got a good system set up, you're pulling a requirement from your Kanban board. It's just one way of tracking your requirements. And it's really this integration build where a lot of the automation of magic happens nowadays, right? It's running through all this verification that things are running well. And that allows you to basically promote a feature if things pass, and there might be some peer review of it, and then here it kind of goes down the pipeline of the factory of being deployed into production. And if you have this kind of setup done really well, you can kind of get to this next point where you've got this whole pipeline set up, right? This is the big focus of DevOps, is zooming out and having the developer not only focus on that one little loop I said, that loop of code, test, code, code, test, code, code, test, code, right, and checking in. But the developer is focusing further up this pipeline, right? The developer becomes concerned with production. They're responsible, along with their teammates, for actually keeping it up and running and writing code that's supportable, right? Like, if you're responsible for keeping the code up and running, you're much more responsible with it. But the operations people also go back and start helping developers out more. And you also get to this great part of the feedback loop where you're focused a lot more. You're given the ability, because you're doing smaller batches here, right? Not only does a smaller batch of release one feature a week, one feature a day, reduce the risk, right? Like, instead of releasing like 50 features after 12 months, like, and just seeing if that works, you're releasing every week, so you're kind of lessening your risk with a smaller batch. But it gives you this interesting feedback loop, and this is this is the magic of what allows you to increase the design quality of your software. Is next week you can make it better. Now think about that, right? Like, if you're on a 6 or a 12-month cadence, it's going to take you 6 to 12 months to make your software better, no matter what happens, right? Because until it gets into users' hands, nothing has changed for them. But this feedback loop, deploying on a weekly cycle, you get this feedback loop where you can start to change how your software is, and you can start to improve it. And that really has a phenomenal effect on increasing the quality of your software. So I like to equate DevOps as essentially the same thing as continuous delivery. And that is, DevOps is the process, the thing you do to enable continuous delivery end to end. And I think of those things as very synonymous. They're not actually synonymous, but I think it's a helpful way of thinking about them. So if you want to get all the benefits of continuous delivery, DevOps is the thing that you need to start doing. So let's check in on how continuous delivery is doing, just very quickly, right? Not only is IT not able to sort of be a source of innovation for their organization, but let's see how they're doing as far as checking in some other ways. So here's a survey I did at 451 where you can see, people are doing all right with continuous integration and building their own things, but there's a third of them who aren't doing anything, which is kind of shocking. But over here, you can see that when it comes to doing textbook CD, a lot of people think they're doing continuous delivery, but things are improving, but there's a lot of improvement to be had, right? So you look at surveys in the market, and definitely there needs to be a lot more continuous delivery going on there to achieve this better quality software out there, to meet that need that organizations are having of increasing the quality of their software. So we've got a lot of room to grow, which I also see is backed up anecdotally when I talk with IT departments. They're pretty dour about their own capabilities, right? Like they know that they should be improving, and they really do need to focus on cheering themselves up. And that's really a lot of what I want to spend the rest of the talk going over is how can we cheer up these donkeys, right? So, we've kind of laid out the fact that they not only need to improve, but they need cheering up. And the first thing, as I've been mentioning, is that technology is not really the problem, but you need to select the right technology, which, as this chart goes over, created by one of my teammates, it's actually kind of a blizzard of stuff to figure out what this technology stack is. It can seem complicated, so I want to try to simplify it for you. So I'd encourage you to go read this cloud native piece on the O'Reilly Radar. You can get the slides. I'll put a URL at the end here, but it goes over basically the requirements for a platform. The cloud platform you need to support this continuous delivery, this style of software delivery. And here's the 12 factor ways. This is input about how developers write their software. And here in the middle is the raw infrastructure needs, like the requirements you have there. A lot of things that are probably familiar to the more operation-centric people. And over here are sort of in the middle, you have the runtime where the applications are running, and it's the requirements of the thing running the application. So there's quite a bit that goes in here. And if you're putting together one of these platforms on your own, this is a good start for what the map looks like, what you're going to need to be building. Now let's reduce that down further. So let's cluster it together into the application frameworks, right? So like I said, there's this notion of 12-factor apps and microservices. Microservices is an architectural style for doing service-oriented delivery, and 12-factor apps are really sort of like rules of thumb for how developers write their applications. You write things this way because they're supported by your runtime platforms down here, which really amount to container orchestration. So you shift from running things definitely on physical servers to running them on these lightweight containers, which give you a lot of speed and a lot of flexibility, actually. Containers are great. They're really fast and nimble. But they do require a fair amount of orchestration. And then that all runs on top of an operations infrastructure that links these things together. And of course, as we've been talking about, you need this empowered culture that can run all of this. So let's further reduce it down to something even simpler. You've got applications, which are satisfying a contract of how they need to run by runtimes, which are maybe I'll just reduce to this slide, which essentially are running on top of very agile infrastructure that you have. So the consequence of doing all of this is that it sort of finishes that last mile of continuous delivery. Once the developer has packaged up the software that they have, it goes down that pipe, if you remember. And this platform is what enables them to deliver very quickly, right? And the organization structure, as we get into, like your development stuff ends up moving towards the top, and you have a new role of platform operators that we'll get into that are running the platform at the bottom. But you're removing variability from this layer of the stack and putting all the variability up here, all the interesting stuff. This is where the interesting stuff happens, so you put your attention up here. And now, in the government space, if you go look up this talk by one of the 18F guys, Diego, actually down there in Austin, so I have lunch with him every now and then, but it allows you to get things reduced down to 9 months, from 9 months down to days, your authority to operate. And the reason it does this is because you're standardizing on these layers down here and all the variabilities up here, right? So all this recomplying and reproving that you're doing, you don't really need to do anymore because you've got a huge amount of automation in your cloud platform. And just think about that speed, right? Like all that waste from the perspective of customer value getting removed from the system, it really frees up time to focus on DevOps and improving the quality of your software. It's sort of a phenomenal shift. But you've got to have that technology in place. And there's lots of cases you can go look up of organizations doing this. The technology works, right? You can go call up Diego and see how things are panning out for him, essentially. So, or I should say for his organization, not just for him, but we also have lots of enterprise customers who are finding success with this and so forth and so on. But you've got to get that technology in place. Now, when you have it in place and you've got this time, management needs to refocus what it's paying attention on. They need to start managing in a different way, and it's a lot more hands-on. So there's a lot of change management that's going to happen when you're freeing up these resources and you're integrating these teams together. And your organization is going to need to know what the goals are, what they should be doing, how they're being tracked. They're going to need you to shepherd them through this change, right? Because the organization is going to change around a lot. Like, we're literally talking about moving operations and development people together and also moving designers on that team and having a more product-centric focus where you could be deploying software every week. So people are going to need to know, how do I deal with that? What are you expecting of me? What are the goals? And that's a lot of change for people to go through. And so managers, as this great book, Leading the Transformation, kind of goes over, they become change management managers, which is much different than a lot of the IT management jobs we've had in the past that have been focused on optimization a lot more and keeping the lights on, if you will, in a positive way instead of innovating and doing new things. Now, I think this other book, these are two great books for thinking about how the role of management changes. And this concise guide to Agile, executive guide to Agile, is a little dated, but I think it has a great overview of, as you shift to a more agile, product-centric mindset, what the levers are and tools that management starts to use. It's a good overview to start educating yourself about that. So next, when you've got this great platform in place, the other thing that I see companies needing to do, and the successful ones not so much struggling through but accomplishing, is they start to look at portfolio management as a way to free up resources for innovation, right? So especially in the government here, right? Like, you've got all these legacy systems and existing things that can feel like it's pulling you down. And you need to spend a lot of effort figuring out how to not have that turn into quicksand, and how to properly manage and maybe even decommission or change around what these services are, right? Like, maybe you can move them to lower cost, lower hassle types of virtualization, right? Maybe they don't need to have such high maintenance systems running them anymore, and you can shift them to various types of cloud, right? And also, it's also good to keep in mind that not every single application you have out there technically is going to be a good fit for DevOps and cloud, right? There's a certain type of application that's a nice fit. And so you want to start focusing on figuring out all the applications you have and filter down to the right kind, not only the right kind of applications that you're running in this way, but also make sure that you're properly managing your legacy IT so it doesn't drag you down. And I noticed that a lot of organizations, they don't really spend as much time on portfolio management as they can. And so they build up this amount of debt that's sort of weighing them down and pulling them below the water. And so, when I and other people of my ilk go and talk to them, they just have this sort of litany of complaints. It's kind of like the Eeyore thing of like, oh, we can't do this because all these things. And the point is, you can do what you sort of manage yourself into being able to do, and part of that is putting some responsible portfolio management into place. And there's an interesting thread to pull on down there in the source. There's a transformation group in EMC that does a lot of work here, which I've taken this admittedly kind of confusing diagram for, but they have a good systematic approach to sort of like clearing out that underbrush, if you will, so that you can focus on the new growth and doing proper forestry in your portfolio. So finally, the organization will need to change as well, right? So to this point, we've talked a lot about how the technology is not the issue and there's different expectations and process that you have. But it's important to realize that the so to speak, physical form of your organization is going to need to change as well. And this really amounts down to like a lot of Conway's Law, I think, right? And Conway's Law, basically, to drastically shorten it, says that the architecture of a software that an organization makes will match what that organization looks like. And I almost guarantee it. There's always exceptions. But if you look at your org chart and you look at your software architecture, they're probably pretty much identical, right? And so what you want to do is organize your organization so that it achieves the architecture that you want, not the other way around. You don't want to have your architecture, I guess I am arguing, you want to have your architecture determine what your organization looks like, but you want to decide on the architecture, right? And in this era, what we want to focus on is the application, right? So you want most of your organization to be at the application layer, right? Focusing on delivering value to your users and your customers, working on that weekly, if not daily turn of software. And this is where the DevOps team comes into play, right? So as I was going over in the motivations for DevOps, you want to have those skill sets on the same team, not spread out over silos that adds extra communication time and things like that and creates all sorts of waste in the system. But you move them to the same team and you have most of your people focused at this layer, at the application layer. And so your organization, when you look at it, should be like, oh, there's lots of application-centric people, whether they're operators or developers, but they're focused on that task. And as you move down into the platform, what we're seeing is people start using Pivotal Cloud Foundry. And when we look out across the industry, we're seeing this interesting sort of funnel, if you will, of the amount of people and what the organization looks like. Now, underneath that is your platform team that's responsible for the cloud platform that I was going over. Remember, simplifying from that big sort of mess of concerns down to just the three layers supported by a culture. And this team is responsible for keeping the cloud platform up and running and upgrading it and adding new features. And that doesn't happen as much as the applications, right? Like there's new middleware that might need to be added, like you might need single sign-on and all sorts of services that are custom to you. And the platform is going to be upgraded every now and then, so they're responsible for that. And then there's also the actual site reliability, or just classically operations people who keep the platform up and running. They're responsible for observing the platform and making sure that as it needs attention, they run it. And there are people who need to do that, but it's less and less of these people. Because again, a lot of that, once you have this platform in place, the responsibility to monitor your application and keep it up and running rests up here at the application layer, right? You've combined those teams together to improve the quality of the software. And then finally, below here are actual physical infrastructure people, right? You still need to have servers this runs on. You still have networking concern and storage, and you need to engineer that out at data centers. And depending on your scale, you might be building data centers or, co-loing it or leasing it or whatever. But, all the same parts are there. Your organization just shifts the amount of attention it spends on each, right? And again, the end result is you spend most of your resources, again, time, money, and attention up here where it matters, right? You're shifting your attention up here from it being equally distributed or from the funnel being the other way. And what you end up with, hopefully, is much higher quality softwares that are enabled by all the cloud platform automation stuff down here, and also changing your meatware practices around. So Anyhow, this is kind of like an early look at how we're seeing the organization pan out when people adopt DevOps and other practices, and I'm constantly updating what this organization looks like, and I'd be curious to hear how you're thinking through or even changing your organization to adapt to cloud and DevOps needs as well. And so with that, that's my overview of kind of what's going on out there that's driving DevOps, sort of my understanding of how DevOps came about and therefore what it is, and the sort of top tips, if you will, that I can give people to help them out and really start getting better at DevOps. And I always like to. My team likes to end our presentation with this bit from the Agile Manifesto, because this really it encapsulates a lot of what the folks on my team are always very passionate about. And that really is, we see software as something that can really improve the way organizations are running and improve people's lives, right? Like whether it's in a business context or a government context. But software can help out with all sorts of things, from helping out civilians to delivering on missions, to, as many people here are concerned about, the types of things they're concerned about. And really, we want to figure out better ways of doing software and help others do that. And that's the mission that we're trying to help deliver on. And like I said, as you guys, as people out there, as you folks figure that out, I'm really interested to hear things you're struggling with and what's working. And I would be happy to talk more about that right now, or you can follow up with me there. And I tried to make my slides as content rich as possible. So, and I obviously can't go over everything in there. In fact, if I flip ahead, you can see there's some further reading to point y'all towards here. But you can get the copy of the slides and dig into the resources. And with that, I'll take the rest of the time for questions. Thanks for having me.